it's so nice to have you here with us as we meet together today. Today we're going to be talking about Acts chapter 17, and with me I have Pastor Alexander Bolotnikov and Pastor Jeff Scoggins. He's actually the author of the Sabbath School lesson we're going to be talking about today. And so I'm going to invite him to share with us just a brief summary of Acts chapter 17.
Thank you, Savannah. Okay, quick summary of Acts chapter 17. Paul was in Thessalonica, had a rough go of it there, went to Berea. The people were a lot more open, so things were going well, but people followed him from Thessalonica and were giving him a bad time there. In fact, so bad that he had to run for his life. He left his traveling companions there with him, or with them in Berea, and told them to come later so they could finish up working with the Bereans. And then while he's in Athens waiting for them, he starts to look around the city, understand the culture and the people, and talk to the people in the marketplace, to the point that eventually people start to ask questions, and they say, let's bring him to this place called the Areopagus. And the Areopagus is, we'll talk about that, but this is the place where all the great thinkers get together. And so Paul gives a speech there that we can unpack a little bit, and afterward, the people then get to decide whether they're going to accept this or not. So there, in a nutshell, is Acts 17.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that it was the first experience of Paul in Areopagus. It was the first experience of Paul preaching outside of the bounds of the synagogue. It was his second missionary trip, although out there in Asia Minor, in Iconia, there were some really pagans whom he encountered. But now he's encountered not the pagans, but the philosophers, which is a totally different intellectual level. But what happened before in Thessalonica, as it says in Acts chapter 17, first he preached. He went to the synagogue. It says some of the Jews, verse 4, were persuaded, and there were also devout Greeks, basically those who are just the beginners. Synagogues were the hubs where many of the many of the Hellenistic people would come to search for something different than Hellenistic philosophy.
Right.
But Berea, I was, a few years ago, I was there. Were you there at the synagogue?
Not to Berea, no.
I was there. They have this synagogue. It was really nice. So it was interesting. Probably the most successful Jewish receptance of Paul was in Berea.
In Berea, yes.
And yet he was still driven out of Berea.
Well, by people that came.
Okay.
But not by the Bereans.
It's not them. Yeah, Bereans were fine.
It was the people visiting.
It was the people that followed Paul.
Oh, okay.
Trying to make trouble for him.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting. A few years ago, I had a discussion with John Paulin about this when we were talking about early Christians, and he made a statement that Jews in early time, Jews were persecuting Christians. And I said, John, this is not correct in today's language, because those Christians who Jews persecuted were Jews too.
Yes, exactly. It's true.
So they persecuted them because they were traitors of the faith, not because they were different.
What I really liked and what I was pulling out of this lesson a lot is the way that Paul approached this, because like you said, it was his first time really engaging with the pagans, especially at the intellectual level that they were. And so he comes in, and we understand from some of what Ellen White says that's when he hits the Areopagus later. But before that, what he does is he goes to the marketplace. See, he could have sat in his room studying his Bible and figuring out all of the arguments that they might have had and things like this, but that's not what he does. He goes to the marketplace. He starts talking to people. He walks around the city. He looks at their gods. He reads their literature. I mean, and their poets, and he studies their philosophy and all of these things. And what he's doing is he's gaining this understanding of the people that he's going to be working with the direct contact with the people. And I just contrast that with the way that we often work today. You know, we come from our churches. Okay, we're going to do evangelistic meetings or whatever it may be. We have all of our slides there, and we never even think about who's going to show up and what are they thinking, what is their worldview, how, you know, what do they believe in, and all these kinds of things. We just nail it. Paul didn't make that mistake.
It's like traveling in the modern day. Yeah. There's a lot of people who just want to go on like bus tours and see the tourist traps and stuff. That's not how I like to travel. I want to go try local food. I want to go to the local markets. I want to see where people like to go that no one else in the tourist areas go, because then you get a real sense of flavor of the culture. When I was reading this passage, what really hit me, it was like Paul was enjoying himself. He was wandering the marketplace. I mean, maybe I'm just like putting that on him because that's what I like to do. But I feel like if you're going to integrate in a culture, you have to be open-minded and come at it from a place of joy, not a place of judgment.
Yeah.
And I really felt like that's how Paul was approaching it.
It's interesting in verse 16, when we talk about Athens, you know, first he goes into the synagogue, but then he ventures out, and it says his spirit was provoked within him when he saw that city was given over to idols.
Yeah.
So he was not very comfortable about this, and I know exactly why, because Jews had a history of these statues and idols, because number one, when we talk about Greek statues, we're talking about like lots of nudity.
Yes, that's true. That is true.
I mean, they were masters of duplicating the parts of the body, which was archaeologically was very, very different compared to what we find in Canaan.
That's true.
You know, these idols in Canaan, which archaeologists find, they're ugly.
Yes, but it's true.
But Greeks have a craftsmanship to make it really, you know,
appealing
to and tempting.
Yeah.
And so Paul was, you know, his spirit was definitely provoked. The other thing which you, Jeff, mentioned about he goes to the marketplace, and I'm thinking from the perspective of what I know based on rabbinic literature between Jews and Hellenists. In rabbinic literature, especially in Midrash, where, you know, there's collections of the sermons that rabbis give, there is this kind of series of stories. They're made up stories. They always start with a discussion between a rabbi and a Caesar. Well, of course, it's not Roman emperor,
right?
But it's actually, this is how they introduce, this is how they pit a Greek philosophical concept against the rabbinic teaching, and they kind of make an artificial debates.
Yeah.
Paul was the rabbi, right? Knows about these debates, and I like what you notice is that he's trying to avoid this debate, actually going into the market. He's trying to find, is there people not really indulged into that kind of philosophy?
Either that, or could he have been preparing himself? Who knows? I don't know. Because what happens is when he starts talking to people, he immediately creates a situation. And they say, some of them say, what's this babbler talking about? He's introducing new gods. And then other ones say, let's invite him to the Areopagus. You know, so there's this.
Yeah, maybe
who knows?
This is the way how he is provoking to get himself invited.
Who knows? Who knows?
And this is kind of an interesting, because is he trying to actually get into a fight?
I don't know. Yeah, but you know,
or he is avoiding the fight.
Well, but then with the way that we see that he works in the Areopagus, we can see he's avoiding it until the end, where he really lays down, you know, what needs to happen. But
can we talk a little bit about what the Areopagus really is? What's the purpose?
It's a rock.
Of it? Why do we care?
It's a big rock.
Okay, all right. Why was it so important in the Greek culture? I mean, what was it that the Athens? Like, why?
It was their meeting place.
Okay.
It was outside of the city of Athens proper. You can see it there. I've stood on the rock, and it's just this big big boulder thing where people could sit around and talk. And it's interesting what Luke says here. When he introduces the Areopagus, he says, all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. And this is what they did on the Areopagus. So the men would get together and they would bat this stuff around. And at first, when I read that, for a long time, I thought that Luke was kind of denigrating them. Well, they're lazy, they're doing nothing but, they don't do any work. But I think I've changed my mind on that. I kind of think maybe Luke was actually saying these people were experienced debaters, intelligentsia. They knew their stuff because they were well versed in it, and they could. These are the ones that have produced Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. Okay, so people that are as nearly as famous as Jesus even today, and so Paul is going to come into this situation to talk to these people. And I wonder, and I get the feeling actually from some of what Ellen White says, and I have a quote we can read if you want, but that he was kind of overawed by the fact that he was invited there.
I mean, that would be overwhelming. It's almost like this huge honor, especially when you think about the other people that have been there and who are still quoted today. I mean,
it's true.
It's when we talk about this, we have to realize that Greece is the birthplace of philosophy.
It is, yes.
And philosophy back then, philosophy was everything. Mathematics was philosophy. Physics was philosophy.
Metaphysics.
It was all. So like when in Judea and Galilee, there were some Roman cities like Caesarea, for example, and they had a school. So like tax collectors. What is a tax collector? To get tax collector, be Jew tax collector, your father has to have enough money to send you to a Greek school of philosophy where you learn, if you're good at math, that's where you become the accountant.
Right.
And that's why Pharisees hated tax collectors because it was a different system of education. There was this. But on the other hand, talking about the thing like Areopagus, I'm thinking of how this thought and thinking and the ideas were produced. The same meeting places continue developing throughout the world history. I'm thinking of the caliphate, and today in America, if I say caliphate, everybody's scared.
Oh no,
ISIS.
Yeah.
But in the ancient days of caliphate, at least 8th century, during the Abbasid rule,
incredible education.
Baghdad. The caliphs of Baghdad, the Abbasid dynasty, they built a huge structure like a stadium because they actually built the city Baghdad, and the caliphs there envision it as a center of the science. So they would invite 8th, 9th century, they would invite a Jewish scholar, a Muslim scholar, and a Christian scholar for a public debate on the science. And to be invited, again, I'm kind of reading from the rabbinic literature from Talmud, being invited to debate. I mean, it's post-Talmudic, of course. But it's kind of, it was a big
deal
thing. It was a big thing. If somebody was honored among the Jews to be invited there, they call him Gaon, which means a genius.
Well, listen to what Ellen White said about this. This comes from manuscript 114. It said, it had been Paul's custom in his preaching to adopt an oratorical style. He was a man fitted to speak before kings, before the great and learned men of Athens, and his intellectual acquirements were often of value to him in the way preparing the way for the gospel. He tried to do this in Athens, meeting false philosophy with true philosophy, eloquence with eloquence, logic with logic, but he failed to meet with the success he had hoped for. It says his aftersight led him to see that there was something needed above human wisdom, even of men of learning. God taught him that something above the world's wisdom must come to him, and he must receive his power from a higher source. Pretty amazing. And so when he goes to Corinth after this, he says, I'm done with that.
Yeah, in fact, I'm glad you're leading into this, because when you started reading this quotation from Ellen White, I opened 1 Corinthians chapter 1, and this is what Paul says already there.
Yeah.
For the verse 18, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. And then he moves into verse 20. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age?
Yeah.
And then the line, has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe.
Yeah. So Paul comes into Athens. He has this idea. So maybe he hoped he was going to get invited to the Areopagus, but even though he was, it sounds like he was kind of overawed by it, but he was hoping that everything that he had received in training, because he was gifted in this, everything that he had received in training, he studied under Gamaliel, and so he had credentials, coming out his ears. He had just everything that he needed, and so he expected that God would be able to work through him using these things that God had given him, sure. And yet that's not what happens. What turns out is that the Holy Spirit did work through him, but not in the way that he had anticipated.
It's interesting when you said about the education. I remember one friend of mine who is retired doctor and urological surgeon who taught at the school. He told me how his osteopathic degree was not very well accepted back in those days when allopath in the medical world ruled the field, and so MD was much higher than DO. With Paul's Gamaliel education, that was a type of like D1.
Right.
Conventional MD across the Roman Empire. But Paul was exposed to the Hellenistic world because he wasn't born in Judea.
Right.
And so, but he wasn't schooled in the Hellenistic world. And eventually, in what I like in this passage from 1 Corinthians 1, 20, 21, Paul pits two wisdoms against each other. The Chachma, which for him, it's in Hebrew from the book of Proverbs, which for him is coming from the Torah, from divine revelation, and the Sophia,
the Greek wisdom,
which comes from reasoning.
Right, right.
And the only reason he was able to do that is because he experienced what it was like to be around that kind of Grecian wisdom through his experience at the rock.
Well, and that's kind of what I was wanting to pull out there is that he expected the Holy Spirit to use this. Holy Spirit used something else. What was it? It was his direct contact, his education on the streets of Athens itself, that is what the Holy Spirit was able to use. And this is one of the major things that I've wanted to pull out for this lesson is the practical aspect that when we take the time to directly interact with the people that we're going to be working with, as Christ's method alone, right? Spending time with them, gaining their confidence, their trust, working with them, showing sympathy until we gain their confidence. That's when we're able to work with them. And if we think that our education from the seminary or whatever it is going to be our in, that's not necessarily going to be what the Holy Spirit is able to use. But when we actually get there with the people, understand them, work with them, that's what the Holy Spirit is able to then use to customize a message to a group. Paul never used this strategy again. Never. But yet, even though he didn't meet with the results that he expected, he did manage, or God managed, to start a small group in Athens, which was more than probably would have happened any other way.
I mean, obviously this is conjecture, but Paul, it says in the chapter that Paul was invited to come to the Areopagus because people were interested in the things he was saying. They got to know him and they're like, oh, this is kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, that's, I don't know. It's just really interesting that he was invited because of his experience with people, because he was curious.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we forget to be curious about the people we're with and the environment that we're in. And I love that this is so humanizing.
Yeah.
Sometimes we see Paul and other disciples as like untouchable, but that's not the case here. I mean, we're seeing his fallibility and that it's applicable to us today as well. And that is really cool.
It is interesting when you were talking about this, Savannah, I began to think of what one of the people described in the Great Controversy book, Joseph Wolff. And Joseph Wolff was a Jew who accepted Jesus in 19th century Germany. The church in Germany at this time was not very friendly to Jewish people. And he moved to England, got his education. England at that time was very high on missionary, and he chose to go Middle East. He traveled, and this is very similar. He was through traveling, and that's how the first missions, at least in the history of British missionary movement, which started in 19th century. These were travelers who were like world explorers. So Paul used the same way. He began to explore the Greek world beyond just the books, because I'm pretty sure that in Gamaliel's yeshiva they taught how to talk to Greeks, and gave some of this. I'm pretty sure the Caesar said to this rabbi, and this rabbi was so smart, and he answered it this way. But Paul went into and decided to explore for himself beyond just what Jewish tradition viewed this, and see for himself, because he definitely needed not just to combat the idea to defend Judaism, but he wanted to win these people to Jesus.
And this is reflected in the way that he actually spoke on the Areopagus. And I think it would be worthwhile to take some time to dissect that a little bit. Because what he did, first of all, I don't think that Luke put everything that he said in that he spoke. I doubt that he got up in the Areopagus and said these few words and then that was it. Okay, there was much more. So Luke is summarizing the main points of what Paul spoke about. And first of all, the first thing that Paul does is he spends time complimenting the Athenians. Okay, so he doesn't put up a billboard that says, you're all going to hell because whatever, right? He comes and he says, I see that you're very religious. And the insinuation is, I admire that. And that's something that the Holy Spirit is able to work with. Okay, it may have been misguided, but at least they've got this desire. And so he compliments them. And then he spends some time showing that he appreciates their culture, their poets. He's familiar with them, these kinds of things, right? He respected what he learned from them. Then he told them about one thing that he had discovered in the study of their religion that even they admitted they didn't understand. So he found this hook, okay? I ran across this statue to an unknown God. And the reason I know you don't know it is because you said you don't. I'm here to tell you, I know who it is. And I can imagine their ears perking up. Whoa, whether they're going to agree or not. This is interesting. And so, are they at this point in kind of resisting whatever Paul is saying? No, they're saying, tell us more.
Yeah, give us fear.
So he's drawing them in on this. So what does he do next? Does he say, well, this is the God and he's going to destroy all of everybody who's not? No, he introduces them first to a God of love. That's the first thing he does. So they're listening to them. They're with him. He shares them this aspect of a God who he knew they desperately needed. Now they're used to gods who are finicky, immature, cruel. You can't trust them. Vindictive. All of these different things. And the gods the Greek gods rely on the people to feed them and do these things for them, things that they need. And here's this God that says, I'm not looking for anything from you. I'm here to support you. I'm here to serve you. I'm here to, and so all of this for them is new stuff. This is the unknown God. And maybe they're thinking, this is a God I might be interested in getting to know about.
But nevertheless, in the very beginning, Paul is really putting a little bit of kind of earkin point into their ears by saying, God who made the world and everything in it. And of course, in Greek philosophy, all they believe that the world comes out of chaos, not some kind of personal God whom Paul introduces welcome to the theory of evolution in the Hellenistic version of it.
Right. But it seems, though, that he didn't lose them because of it, because there are people at the end that say, we want to hear more. But then he does drop a hammer. Okay, his final point then at the end of his speech is he warns them of this God is judge, and judgment time is coming when we're all going to answer for the way that we have lived our lives, ignorant or not. Because he says, God winked, God overlooked some of the things that we have been doing, but there's coming a time. And then he says, all of this is provable in the resurrection of a man, Jesus Christ. And of course, at that point, you can hear some shifting, some uncomfortable movement on the Areopagus, because that is ridiculous. Okay, nobody gets raised from the dead. That's absolutely ridiculous.
The whole concept of resurrection is absolutely repugnant, unacceptable for philosophy based on reason.
Right. And the thing that I really like about this story is that Paul had avoided going there until he had said everything that he really needed to say, and then now is the hard stuff. Boom. They get a choice now. If they reject it, at least they know what they're rejecting. They're saying, I want to hear nothing more about this God who created everything and who is a God of love and who serves me rather than me serving him all the time. Or let me hear more. And this proof thing, okay, I don't like the idea of, or I don't believe the idea of someone's being resurrected, but I'll hear you out anyway.
Yeah. So when you guys were talking about the resurrection from the dead thing being like repugnant, my immediate question was, wait, I thought in Greek mythology, there's the God of the dead and where the souls go and the concept of like people coming back and that kind of thing. So how does this play into that concept?
Oh, well, there is a famous mythology of Orpheus. And Orpheus is mourning the death of his beloved, what's her name, Eurydice, whatever.
Is it the sun one?
No. It was just a human. He was
a human.
Yeah,
okay.
Orpheus, the famous singer, and so forth. And he ventures into the Hades.
That's right. To go get her. Right.
To go get her, and of course, no way. So that this whole mythology is to prove you can't pull anybody from the hands of the Hades. It's impossible.
So they did believe in a separate soul from body, that thing, but it was not back on Earth. Okay. They would stay where they're at in their own realm of the dead.
So there is absolutely no way possible in the Greek mythology that would allow someone to raise back from the dead.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so at this point in the story, they stand up, they're done, and some are saying this guy is nuts, and the others are saying, let's hear him again. And what's fascinating to me here, and from Acts of the Apostles, she says, Ellen White says, there is a treasure for the church in what happened. And so I thought to myself, what is the treasure for the church? What were we supposed to learn here? And I think it's worth reading. The words of the apostle in the description of his attitude and surroundings as traced by the pen of inspiration were to be handed down to all coming generations, bearing witness of his unshaken confidence, his courage in loneliness and adversity, and the victory he gained for Christianity in the very heart of paganism. Okay, so this was a victory.
Mm-hmm.
Paul's words contain a treasure of knowledge for the church. He was in a position where he might have easily said that which would have irritated his proud listeners and brought himself into difficulty. Had his oration been a direct attack upon their gods and the great men of the city, he would have been in danger of meeting the fate of Socrates, execution.
Mm-hmm.
But with a tact born of divine love, he carefully drew their minds away from heathen deities by revealing to them the true God who was to them unknown. So what does it say? The treasure of knowledge for the church was that he avoided irritating his listeners. Isn't that awesome?
That is awesome. It's so practical too.
Right.
We can do it today.
Exactly. And we must do it today because so much of Christianity today has become combative to the point that there are other groups out there, not Christian, who are now accepted as more loving and more accepting than Christians. It's the devil's counterfeit of love.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. It's heartbreaking. So what do we do?
It's very interesting to notice that the title of the lesson is Reaching the Unreached, and you, Jeff, picked the Areopagus story as the biblical case of reaching the unreached people, because in those days Jews were reached, the Greek Hellenists were not reached, and actually even the pagans were reached a little bit, but these Hellenists were not.
Right.
And so it's kind of a little bit other way around today, because we have quite well into reaching the Christianity, but
Right.
there are other religion, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, who are unreached today.
And that is my I'm global mission at heart. And I shouldn't say I'm tired of reaching Christians. We want to reach everybody, but I am tired of ignoring everybody else because we don't know how to do it. And yet we have some examples in the Bible, and this is a perfect one of how to do it. And then Jesus, of course, is another great example.
We could talk forever about Jesus and his amazing example for us, but taking today's Bible verses, when talking about the treasure that we can pull out of that, what is the practical application? How can we be like Paul in our ministry today? What can we take with us?
My takeaway from this story is that there is no avoiding getting involved personally in people's lives. We like the idea of doing everything mass evangelism and mass this and mass that, and because we can do it from a distance. We can go preach, we can go home and sleep. When you get involved in relationships, life gets messy, it gets inconvenient. You start to feel pain when other people are hurting. All of these things, it becomes extra, and in our lives, selfish as we are as human beings, we don't want that. We want to do our duty and then go do whatever I want to do. And that's not the way we're called to do ministry. If we're going to finish this work that God has given us to do, we absolutely must be involved in the lives of the people around us and take whatever comes along with that, with God's help. And for God's sake, do everything we can to not turn off our listeners before they've even had a chance to find out who God is.
I love that.
It's interesting that when I look at today's Areopagus story, I think, today's application of the Areopagus story, I think, what kind of group of people today are like these Epicurean philosophers and Stoic philosophers. What can it be like in today for our churches, for our people to interact with? Because, those who were former Greeks and Hellenists are now Christians.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of people like Buddhists,
Hindus, Muslims, right? Yeah. Well, they're monotheistic, at least. They believe in God, so that's different.
See, Jews and Muslims and Christians, this is still Abrahamic religion.
That's right.
True.
Because you can refer to the revelation.
And they know what it is.
And they know what it is.
They know what about sin, and they know about salvation, and they know those things. So that's different. Yeah,
But
you're right.
when I encountered first time the Buddhist world, I thought I'm on the other planet.
Right. It's true.
True.
And when you go to a Buddhist person, you talk about sin, they don't have a clue what you're talking about.
No.
Creation, judgment,
Nothing. And if you talk about heaven, they say, which one? There's 7 of them. And so there's all of these things that if we don't know the people, we can go in and we can do our evangelistic meetings, and it's just going to go completely over their head. They won't have a clue what we're talking about.
Because I am, being always focusing my ministry on Jews, the first time many years ago, I met a person who was a Hindu, and we began to talk. He was asking me about Christianity. The way he asked questions, I realized, boy, I don't know how to even build the bridge.
Exactly.
I talk back and forth. I don't know how to explain, how to build the bridge. While I was talking, I prayed. Finally, God gave me this way to say to him. I said, the God I believe in believes that teaches us that if you follow his commandments, you'll get a blessings. And if you don't follow his way, you'll get curses.
And then he understood.
It impressed him so much. He had no idea.
Global Mission at the General Conference actually produces resources specifically for these people groups that teach people how to work with them and how to understand what's happening. It's valuable resources.
Yeah, I didn't realize later on. I talked to one pastor from India, and I explained this experience. He said, "Oh, you hit the right point because they believe in that you're predestined to be."
That's right.
I had no idea.
It's true.
Interesting.
The Areopagus for today, it's that, and it's also secularism.
Yeah,
Secularism is just taking over like crazy, and we don't even understand. It's an entirely different worldview from Christianity. So unless we have friends that are parts of these societies that we get to know and ask and talk about and become educated the way that Paul did, we're gonna be messing up.
I discovered coming from Russia, because when we speak secular atheist in Russia, we're always thinking Marxist philosophy. But
that's different.
In America, especially when we lived in Northwest, I discovered the true face of secularism. And I discovered that it is inspired and fueled by the Oriental Buddhist ideas.
That is something that they definitely key into.
It's influence. So it's kind of basically all the same type of big Areopagus.
Yeah. So, and to close out with your question, we simply must get together, become friends with, develop relationships, personal relationships, ongoing relationships, long-term relationships with these groups of people. Sometimes we think, oh, I don't want to be corrupted, I'll stay away. We're never going to reach them unless we do. Get in there with them and become friends and develop relationships with them.
And be curious.
Understand.
Yeah, I think this lesson is just such a practical lesson to me. And I think we have had such a great opportunity together today to kind of talk it through. And I want to thank each one of our listeners for joining us today. I want to thank you guys for being with us. And I'd like to ask you, if you're watching this, what can you do to learn about the community around you? Go to the marketplace, be curious, become friends with someone that's not like you, get to know them, You might be surprised what you discover, not just about them, but about you as well.